So I appreciate everyone joining. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to effectively take yourselves on a hack venture. I think that's the best bit about this, as you decide as to where or what we do as the hacking commences. It's a little bit of introduction and a little bit of, I suppose, rules about the engagement today. So you're joined by myself, Head of Endpoint Security here at Bytes. It's great that I see some familiar names I've spoken to in the past. I'm joined with George Walker, who's one of our endpoint security specialists here at Bytes as well.
Hi,
and then we're joined as well by two guys from Sophos, who'll be doing the majority of the talking and the technical expertise. So we've got John Hope, one of the senior technology evangelists, and Lee Sunter, one of the security consultants at Sophos. So during this event, as I mentioned, it's all around you guiding what we want to do as part of the hack. So there will be a number of polls, and you decide. Obviously, it's majority. If there's a draw, then we might open it up and kind of get a few people to shout out. Whoever shouts out first gets to decide and vote. In terms of questions, I think the easiest way is to field those questions at the end. Feel free to put them in the chat box. If it's sort of like a quick question, then we'll answer those on the fly. I'll be myself and George monitoring that, and then we'll come back towards the end of the session and cover those in a bit more detail. And then eventually we'll go on to having a few cocktails with the guys from Madam Geneva and Jen, and have a history tour from those guys. So I'll pass over to John from Sophos, and without further ado, we'll crack on.
Yeah, fab. Thanks, Mark, for the wonderful intro. And guys, everybody relax. This hopefully is going to be a fun session. It's going to be roughly an hour in length. And I say roughly because we are doing this live. Things may go well, things may go slightly wrong. We may go down some technical rabbit holes, who knows? But rest assured that we have built in plenty of time in the agenda for you guys to ask questions and pick our brains a little bit later on. So yeah, do hold those questions if you can, and we'll pick those up just a little bit later on. And as Mark said, this is your opportunity to choose your own hack venture. So this is a webinar like no other, because you guys have the opportunity to steer the direction that we go in and help guide our hacking attempts as we work our way through our target network. You would like to think that an event of this magnitude would have had some kind of fantastic intro created by Sophos, complete with lots of dramatic music. And I'm glad to say we got halfway there. So here's the cool video intro. Play their own dramatic music in your head, if you will. Cool, right. So what we're going to do during the hack venture, like I said, is allow you guys to pick and choose how we proceed as we pick holes in our victim network and help us to execute a targeted attack against an organization. And we are going to take you through most of the steps of the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So we're going to start out doing stuff that real hackers would do. We're going to start out with recon. We're going to size up our victim. We're going to find out where some of the weak spots are. We are going to create a weaponized document. We're going to deliver that, and we're going to hope that our victims open that up so that we can gain a foothold, gain some command and control over the organization, and then hopefully ultimately carry out our actions upon objectives. So and you guys get to decide what that objective is at the end of this as well. So yeah, stick with us all the way through as we go through this chain. And we're going to begin with recon. Okay, so just like a real cyber criminal, we have selected our victim already, and we've selected the Acme Sprocket Company. And there's a couple of reasons why we've picked on the Acme Sprocket Company. The first is the fact that these guys have some intellectual property which we're really interested in. They've got some stuff that's going to revolutionize the sprocket market. And we also know that these guys are doing really well financially as well. And that's great from a cyber criminal's point of view, because if they are successful, they've probably got money in the bank, and hopefully we can use that to our advantage a little bit later on when it comes to paying out on all of this hard work that we've done. So not only have we sized up a target company, but we've already identified as well some potential victims inside of this organization as well. And we have 3 potential victims here on the screen. So The first we have on the left is Steve Rogers. Now, Steve Rogers is a person of interest to us because he's the CFO. So clearly he's got a lot of privileged access in this organization. Not only are we interested in Steve because of the fact that he's got such a high level of access, but we're also interested in him because he's a prolific poster on Instagram. This guy shares his whole life. I mean, we all know somebody like this, right? He shares everything on Instagram, and he's giving us lots of really useful information that we can use against him. He's also the same on Facebook, and he's neglected to secure his Facebook profile. So again, we can glean a lot of information from that. And one of the things we've already learned is that Steve Rogers is really into his retro TV shows. Okay, now in the center, we have got target number 2, David Lightman. David Lightman is of interest to us because he is the senior systems administrator at the Sprocket company. And we're interested in him because, again, he's very free with his information online. So he shared a lot of information about his skills and expertise on LinkedIn, which seems reasonable, but it's a terrible mistake because we now know the kind of environments, the kind of software, the kind of applications that we are going to find inside the Sprocket company. So he's given us a leg up already, and he's also prolific on Instagram as well. And one of the things we've learned from his Instagram profile is that he loves cats, and I mean that he loves cats. We'll maybe see more about that later on. And then our third victim is Angela Bennett. Angela Bennett is a HR operations specialist, and we're interested in her because obviously as a HR specialist, she has got loads of privileged information there that we could potentially steal and use. And we know that she is she's really into her holidays. So when she can, she likes to travel abroad, and she loves to share that on social media and wind up her friends. So she's busy on Facebook, she's busy on Instagram, and we've already learned that when she's not holidaying, that she loves to spend time watching films on Netflix. Okay, so those are our 3 potential victims. You've probably gathered that here's your first choice. So what I'm going to do now is cross my fingers and hope this all works. There should be a poll on your screen now that allows you to select your would-be victim. So are we going to pick on target number 1, Steve Rogers? Are we going to pick on target number 2, David Lightman? Or are we going to go after target number 3, Angela Bennett? Now, I'll remind you when you're voting that I'm between you and cocktails. So, you know, speed it along a little. Fantastic. Okay, so interesting here that there's a bit of a split between you all. So I'm going to end the poll now. There, practically everyone has voted, and our winner on this occasion is David Lightman in the center there. So you guys are going straight for the jugular, and I like your style. What you're doing there is you're highlighting David Lightman as a potential victim because of his level of access into the organization as a systems administrator. So let's find out a little bit more about David Lightman. So David Lightman, like I said already, he's shared a lot of information on LinkedIn about his skills, his expertise. So we know a bit about what we're going to find inside this network. And I already mentioned that he's into cats. And actually, this is interesting because he appears to have a bit of a love-hate relationship with his cat right now. You'll notice there that he's going to go out on a limb and say that he loves his cat more than anything else. But then simultaneously, or certainly not too far apart underneath there on Twitter, he's complaining about the fact that his cat has gone off the food that he's just bought from the internet. How annoying is that? So he's got presumably a shed full of cat food that's no good to him anymore. But the thing that I'm really interested in is this picture that he put on Facebook down the bottom right hand side. He's really excited to be flying to the US aboard an A380 from British Airways. So cool, he's taking a flight, or he may already be on a flight, and he's certainly in the market for information about British Airways. Now, Lee, my colleague, is in the background now frantically creating a weaponized document that we are going to send to David, and we're going to exploit the thing that we just learned on social media. But before we do that, no demonstration of this nature is complete without some kind of warning. So I just want to emphasize that in order to simulate hacking and to show you some of the techniques that cyber criminals use, we have disabled pretty much all of the protection that's offered by Sophos Central and InterceptX on our victim machines. This is a bad idea, guys. Please do not try this at home. Okay, and I'll show you the protection that we've disabled in just a second. But before I hand over to Lee to take you through some of the hacking experience, I want to show you the very, very first hacking tool, which is a simple one, mobile phone. We've all got them. And I'm going to learn something about the Sprocket company by making a quick phone call. Right. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. It's John here, and we're about to run out of sprockets, and I really need to get some more sorted out. But the person who normally does the ordering, they're on holiday at the minute, and I can't find the email address of our account manager. Can you help? Yeah. Okay. So it's emma.black@acme.co.uk. All right. That's perfect. I really appreciate your help. Thank you. All right. Cheers. Cool. So hacking doesn't always have to be mega sophisticated. I just learned the email format of that organization by a simple phone call. Now, to be fair, I probably could have found that online in all the different places as well. But it just goes to show that not all reconnaissance activity happens across computer networks. It's worth talking to your staff about not giving information away on the telephone to complete strangers, because that information could be used against the organization. So with that in mind, Lee, if you'd be kind enough to share your screen, let's go down the process of starting to do some actual hacking. Right, so just to paint the picture for everybody, on the left hand side here we have David's computer. And you can see that we've already got the email client open, and we'll come on to that in just a second. On the right-hand side, this is our cyber criminal. So on the right-hand side here, we have a Kali Linux installation, which is basically full of tools that we can use against victim machines. It's essentially a hacking build of Linux. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all, Lee, if you'd be so kind, is let's just open up David's endpoint and let's just show off the fact that we've disabled most of the protection on this machine. So if we look at all the different things that we could be doing, you'll see that most of those things are turned off. So we've disabled a lot of the signature-based detection. We've disabled things like DLP, like application control, and we've disabled the tamper protection as well. So like I said, don't try this at home, but in order for us to do the bad stuff, we need to turn off the Sophos protection in a lot of cases. Okay, cool. Right, so let's get that out of the way. Now, like I said, remember, David is currently in the process of booking or taking a flight with British Airways. So Lee's made a document about BA, and what we're doing is hoping to induce him to actually click on the attachment there. So you can see, thank you for booking your flight to Houston, Texas. Okay, now this might be a bit of a surprise to David. Maybe it's not the time and date he expected, or it's come out of left field. You can see that there's an attachment on there. So let's open up that malicious attachment. I gave it away because I said the word malicious attachment. Of course, you can probably imagine what's going to happen here is we've got a document here which we've weaponized. And what we're doing here, this is the cyber criminals creating a sense of urgency around that attachment. So we've picked on a subject matter which we know is of interest to David. And then we're using phrases like your urgent confirmation is needed. And what we're doing is we're hoping that David suspends the rational part of his brain for a little while and instead emotionally clicks on that link because he needs to get that information and act on it immediately. So what it's encouraging us to do is enable editing and enable the active content on this attachment. Now, hopefully the audience already knows this is a bad idea, but that David's in that emotional state now. He needs to get that information. It's urgent. So he's going to do all the wrong things and he's going to enable the active content. And well, that was a bit underwhelming, wasn't it? Because nothing really happened. Notice on David's screen, nothing's going on there. Nothing's changed. The endpoint hasn't kicked off. There's nothing going on. But on the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see that we have used Meterpreter to open a connection to that victim machine. So you can see that we've got a session established to that victim machine. And you can see that that's all happened in the background without the victim necessarily being aware of it. Okay, so now we've got a bit of a leg into that machine. Here's another question for you all, and that is, what would you guys like to do next? So I'm going to share another poll with you. And this is your opportunity to decide which way you want to go now that we've got access. So there are 3 choices available to you. There is the opportunity to escalate privileges on this machine. There's the opportunity to steal credentials, or there's the opportunity to stage persistence. So I'll leave it up to you. What do you want to do next? I think there's a few would-be hackers in the audience here because I can see a definite swing towards one of those options. I don't want to influence it too much. Okay, so pretty much everyone has voted. I will now share with you the results. So most of you have elected to stage persistence, which is a really good choice. And the reason it's a really good choice is by staging persistence, and what we're doing is we're getting a foothold onto this machine that we can use again and again and again. Okay, so we're not just here for the short term. This allows us to have repeat access to this machine at our will. It's a technique which is often called living on the land. Okay, so it's that sort of almost like a farming process of having victims that we can call on whenever we need to and do whatever things that we need to do with them. So let's go through the process then of staging persistence. And what we need to do first of all is we need to escalate the privileges on this machine. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to use an inbuilt command called get system. This is kind of hack by number stuff. Get system is basically going to run a whole bunch of scripts and techniques to try and gain system level access. And that hasn't worked out. Told you it was a live demo. Don't worry, I was expecting that. Sometimes things like user access control get in the way, and there are other techniques that can block the basic approaches. But Lee and I are determined cyber criminals. So we're going to carry out some reconnaissance on this machine, and we're going to find something to get a leg up. So we're going to run the sysinfo command now, and we're going to find a bit of information about what is on this machine. So we can see it's a Windows 10 build, and we can see there are 2 users logged into this machine. And what we're also going to do is carry out some recon using a nice inbuilt tool called the local exploit suggester. We're lazy hackers, right? So what we could do is we could look at every process on that machine. We can do some research and find out which ones are potentially exploitable. And then we can start running exploits against those machines. But who's got time for stuff like that? There's actually a tool inbuilt which will suggest exploits for us. So it's doing all of that reconnaissance and all that research for us. So it's now gathering information about the processes running on this machine. This is a good opportunity for me to talk to you about patching, because this exploit suggester relies on software which is out of date, that is potentially vulnerable. And if you guys spend a bit of extra time patching and keeping your software up to date, then you are less likely to become a victim of these kind of things. Right, so we've run 31 exploit checks, and we have found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 potential exploits. And the one that I'm really interested in is the event viewer, because I know the event viewer runs at the entity authority level, so it's at system level of access. So we are going to use that, and we're going to use an inbuilt exploit against that. So we're going to have a little go at that in a second. We're going to load that exploit up. We're going to load it into our first session. Cut and paste is key. We're trying to save Lee's keyboard because he goes through them at a rate of knots. So we're doing a bit of cut and pasting here. And then obviously we need to hit the exploit button and go launch that exploit. Now, fingers crossed, we should see some success once we press go. So we've opened up a reverse handler and we are making a connection, and you can see that session number 2 has opened. And what you'll also see is the registry keys being cleaned down in a second, and that's our cue to move on to the next step. So we are now ready to move forward, and what we're going to do is migrate into the system context. And right now you can see Lee's just run the get user ID command, and you can see at the moment we are at user level of access, but we want to go higher, we want more. So we're going to run the PS command that's going to list all of the active processes on this machine. Oh, and there's a lot. So what I'm going to do is we're going to run that again, and we're going to filter it down for characters with the uppercase I in there. The reason for that is I'm looking for the indexer, because I know that that is running at system level, and I know that that is a process that we can potentially migrate into. So there's the search indexer. We can see that's running at processor ID 5448, and you can see that it's running at the entity authority level. So we're going to migrate into that process now so that we can use that level of access. So we're going to migrate into that process, and we have successfully made our way into that process. Right now, we've got system level access. We've pretty much got control of this machine, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to find something on this machine that we can use to establish a permanent connection to the device. So the best place that we can look for this is going into the startup section, because any applications that are in the startup section, as the name suggests, will automatically load up each and every single time that this machine boots up. So we're going to have a look at the contents inside the startup folder and see what we can find in there. So again, a little bit of a cut and paste exercise. And what I said we're looking for here is everything that's in the startup section. So there you go. There are two things in the startup section. The one I'm really interested in is Putty. Putty is the perfect application for my purposes here, because it is an application which you probably expect to find on a system administrator's machine, but it's not really updated very often. And it is an application that is potentially vulnerable to this form of attack. Okay, so let's go and find the Putty executable, because I want to get a copy of it down. Okay, so we're going to go find that Putty executable, and we are going to download it to the hacker's machine, because we're going to start messing around with that particular instance of Putty. So here it is. It's coming on down in a second. There we go. Right, so let's go and grab that version of Putty, and we are going to open up another application on this machine. Okay, so the application that we're going to open up on here is called Shelter. And Shelter is a wonderful little tool that allows us to carry out a technique which is called code caving. So we are going to inject some additional code into the Putty application, and we're going to use that code to connect back to our hacker's machine. So I like Shelter as a name because I love a pun. I'm a dad and I like dad jokes and that sort of thing. And Shelter is a particularly good pun, because what we're going to do in this case is we're going to create a what's called a reverse shell inside the application. So that is going to send information back and form a remote connection every time that this version of Putty launches. And it's also a way of hiding out. So Shelter, as in some sort of protection, we are hiding out as cyber criminals inside this poisoned version of Putty. Okay, so what we're doing now is basically just going through all of the lines of code inside Putty, and we're looking for places that we can inject those malicious processes and those malicious lines of code into our machine. While it's doing this, I will emphasize as well that normally InterceptX would be able to detect this on the endpoint machine. So once a code caved version of an application is open, InterceptX will detect that. But we've actually, for the purposes of this demo, we've turned off that code caving detection process, so that we can show you how hollowing out a process can help you stage persistence and help build those connections up automatically. So I'm hoping it's pretty much got to the end of looking through all of those lines of code. Normally takes about 60 seconds to do this. So my padding and my fluff is about to run out. Thank goodness for that. Right, we've got it. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is, now that we found out where we can insert code, we are going to slide in that reverse shell set of commands. And you can see that, again, it's pretty much hack by numbers here. So we're going to use option 1. We're going to create a reverse TCP connection. So we're going to select option number 1 by the index, and we are going to hard code in the destination. So we are telling this version of Putty, when you power up, you need to create reverse connection to this IP address. So that's the IP address of our hacker. That's 11.11.10.201. So it's injected those additional lines of code, and that's now complete. So what we've got on our hands is a slightly wonky version of Putty now, which works and behaves in exactly the same way as you would expect, but it's also got that little sneaky extra lines of code in there as well to build that connection back. Now, of course, it's no good on our hacker's machine. What we need to do is send it back to David and send it back to our victim, so that when Putty is opened, these reverse connections happen automatically. So we're going to go copy that across. It's worth mentioning as well that if Putty was running on David's machine, that we could, by remote control, we could shut it down so that we can copy another version across and then even relaunch it if we needed to. So we're going to send that across. It's gone over to our victim machine. We're not going to do anything with it just now, but we're going to use that a little bit later on, depending on which way you guys choose to go. So with that out of the way, I guess it's another opportunity to decide, what would you guys like to do next? So now we've got some persistence on that machine. Now that we've got system level of access on that machine, where do you want to go? on your hack venture? Do you want to hunt around the network to see what else you can find? Do you want to look for potentially juicy files on this machine itself? Or would you like to monitor user activity live, which is every bit as voyeuristic as it suggests? So we're keeping an eye on what users are doing and potentially extracting information directly from that machine. Okay, right, bit of a split in the audience. This is kind of exciting, not quite knowing which way we're going to go. I must admit, it's good. Okay, so pretty much everyone has voted, so I'm going to call it a day there. I'm going to share the results with you, and it looks like you guys are, serious hardcore hackers, because you want to go network recon. So I'm guessing that means what you really want to do is start looking around the network for some of those really, really high value targets. So we don't just want to own this one machine. We want to go full scale and go after the network as a whole. So the big question, I suppose, is how do we do that then? How do we go after network recon? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have to find some suitable applications that maybe contain credentials that we can use across the network. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the enum applications command on this machine to go have a little mooch around and find out what's running on this machine again, with a view to looking to see, are there any applications in there that, for one, we know we can get data out of, that are likely to be holding applications that are useful for us to look across the rest of the network. Just before we do that, what we're doing now is we're dropping down into the OneDrive process, because we need to be in the user context in order to get hold of these list of applications. So we're just loading up the user context now, and now we're going to run that command enum applications, which is going to give us a list of all of the applications that are running on this machine. Right, what have we got here? Well, there's a lot of Sophos related protection stuff, which is nice to see. But there's also some other applications on here that I'm particularly interested in, and I'm going to highlight two that I'm really interested in. We've got a FileZilla client here, and that obviously is an FTP service, so it's going to have network credentials included in there, which might be useful for us. And then a little bit lower down, we've got the Remote Desktop Connection Manager as well. Now that one clearly is of interest to us, because if it's a Remote Desktop Connection Manager, it's going to have credentials for potentially loads of other machines right across the estate. Okay, so I'm very interested in that one as well. Right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to steal some credentials out of FileZilla. So we're going to go back to looking at FileZilla, and there is an inbuilt exploit. This is easy, isn't it? Wow. There's an inbuilt exploit here to gather credentials from FileZilla. So we're going to run that FileZilla client cred command, and you can see what it's done is pulled out a username and a password associated with a server on our network. So that's kind of handy. We'll keep that one for later. We might need that. That could be good. Now, the other one that I mentioned is of interest to us is the Remote Desktop Connection Manager. So that one is obviously going to be full of passwords and stuff that's going to be useful. So, and again, believe it or not, there is an inbuilt exploit for Remote Desktop Connection Manager. So we're going to run the RDC Manager creds, and let's have a look what we can find in there. Right, so we've got a couple of servers, and we've got some usernames and some passwords. Fantastic, absolutely amazing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up Shell, and we're going to ping one of those servers, because what we really need is its IP address. So we're going to ping Office server. And there we go. So first of all, we know the server's running, and we also know its IP address is 11.11.10.10. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to drop out of there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull a little bit of a fast one here, because we are going to start to use David's machine as a proxy for our commands to and from this server. The reason we do this is twofold. One is from a logging and events point of view, it looks like David is the one that's talking to the server. And if there's any kind of access control list that's on this computer, on this server, then as far as it's concerned, those connection requests and those commands are coming from David's computer. So that's a perfectly legitimate internal desktop, which should be allowed to connect to that server. So we're bypassing the ACL, and we're really hiding ourselves from a logging and reporting point of view. So what we're doing is loading up a package in here called auto route, and we're going to assign that to the session. We are now telling that session just a little bit of information about the subnet it's looking at, so that it knows how to route things appropriately and load it into the routing table. And then we are going to run that exploit, followed by launching a server on that remote machine, which we're going to use as the proxy for our commands. We're just going to load in an appropriate port number that we can use to forward on those commands. Perfect. All right, so we've got that up and running. That's very, very useful, because what we're going to do next is we are going to attempt to form a remote desktop connection to that server. So we're going to use the proxy chains and then remote desktop set of commands in conjunction with each other. So what we're doing, just as a reminder, is we are utilizing David's machine as a bridgehead to then create a remote desktop connection to the server. So as far as the server is concerned, it's David's computer that's logging in, and it should all be absolutely fine. And remember that we stole some of those credentials from RDC just a short while ago as well. So here's a remote desktop connection established, or certainly prompting us for authentication. And we're going to drop in that file share _admin username that we stole from the connection manager earlier. And we're going to drop in that password, which was super secret. Okay, so it didn't let us in. It is a live session. And again, to be honest, I was actually expecting that anyway. Those credentials are actually fake. The reason that we've used those fake credentials is that we're going to use those a little bit later on. We start doing some threat hunting when we switch sides and we go to the blue team instead. So, but you take the point here that you could very easily open up an RDP connection to that machine and start to drive it remotely, as long as you had the appropriate credentials. So it's really, really simple to start pivoting around the LAN and start looking around that environment. Okay, so we're making good time and making good progress on this. So what we are going to do next is we are going to offer you guys another opportunity to determine ultimately what our final objective is going to be. So given that we've got access to this computer, given the fact that we could steal files from it if we wanted to, we could monitor user activity live, given that we're mooching around the network and we've potentially got access to other machines, what do we want to do? What's the payout going to be? Do we want to press the thermonuclear button, and do we want to launch ransomware against this organization? Or do we instead want to attack the network and start pulling down network resources? Okay, some people on the fence here, not quite sure which way to go. It's taken a bit longer to make a decision, and I can't blame it. It's a tough choice, I guess, as to which way we want to go with this environment. Ransomware is typically quite popular, as long as you're not the victim, I suppose. But people do like to see sort of behind the scenes of how those things happen. But equally, a lot of people like to see the reconnaissance happening across the network as well. So let's just see what those results are. Okay, well, I think everyone has pretty much contributed and voted. So let me share those results with you. Okay, so it looks like most of you are going directly to the jugular and are interested in launching ransomware against this particular organization, which is kind of fair enough, I suppose. So let's have a look at how we can do a bit of ransomware. So if we're going to launch ransomware, we probably ought to find out a little bit about our victim machine and what information is contained on there, for a number of reasons. One, obviously, we can encrypt the sensitive documentation, And if we can find out information about our victim as well, we can probably have a reasonable stab at how much we can get away with from a ransom perspective. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to look for files on this machine that have the .doc extension on them. So I'm looking for Word documents here. So we're going to have a little look at that machine and see what we can find. And you can see here, we've got a very interesting document here called 2020 Cybersecurity Insurance Certificate. Now, as Lee frantically types out the commands in order to download that document, he's probably really cross with me for creating a file name that's so lengthy. But what we're going to do here is we are going to fetch a copy of that document so that we can inspect it and have a little look at it, because that cybersecurity insurance certificate might be really, really interesting for us. So I apologize, Lee. I should have probably called it cats.doc or something. Never mind. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? So let's go and have a look at that document and let's have a little peek at it. Now, the reason that cybersecurity insurance document is potentially so interesting is if it tells us how much our victim organization is insured for, we've got a pretty reasonable stab at the kind of values that we can ask for in terms of a ransom with a reasonable chance of a successful payout. Obviously, if we exceed the insurance value, then it's going to hit their pockets more directly and they might be less sort of pliable and less inclined to pay that ransom. But if we can get it under the bar, we might just get away with this. So let's open up that document and let's have a look and see how much these guys are insured for. So we can see that they're insured by the New Atlanta Insurance Corporation for $1 million. So Lee, what do you reckon? Should we go for 800,000? Do you think that's pretty reasonable? That ought to buy you a new keyboard and me a nice yacht or something. Seems pretty reasonable to me. Cool. All right, so now we've got that information, then let's have a look at actually delivering a payload on this machines. But before we do that, let's go back to our victim machine for a second and let's have a look at the files inside our victim's machine. So let's go and have a little peek inside the file explorer and let's see those files in situ where they are at the moment. So here's a bunch of files, including that cybersecurity insurance document. So Lee, I don't know if you want to open it up on the victim's machine there, just so we can kind of prove that it is a real document and there's no fakery going on here. There you go. So there's the document that we were just looking at a second ago, actually live on that victim's machine. Fantastic. All right, you probably need to close it down. Then what we'll do is we will go back to our hackers side and we will run a simulation of ransomware. Now, we don't play around with real ransomware at Sophos because we'd probably end up in a mess, frankly. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to run encrypt, which is an inbuilt Metasploit script to encrypt files. So this has the same effect as ransomware, but without the potentially devastating effects for the wider machine. So we're going to hit that run encrypt command. And we've intentionally slowed this down, by the way. So, so when you're looking at the machine there on the right-hand side, excuse me, all you can see there is those files changing their extension down to .owned. So you can see that we are encrypting those files, making them useless to our victim machine. And you can also see that what we've done is we've successfully detected that ransomware, and that's InterceptX pulling that ransomware attempt out, recognizing that those files are being encrypted, and then stopping the encryption process. And what you can also see as well is those files being reverted back to their original nature. So if we go back to there again, you can see that InterceptX has actually put those files back into their appropriate state and reverse the encryption. So Lee, again, if you can open up that file, you can see it's back to normal, right? We've got access back to that machine again. And that's because if we go back to the endpoint, you can see that we actually left the ransomware detection on. So even though we turned up the signature-based detection, we turned up a lot of the other types of detection, we left ransomware detection on intentionally to show you that feature, because what this is doing is detecting that pure process of encryption without necessarily having seen that encryption attack before, without having any prior knowledge of it. It's just convicting that process based purely and simply on the fact that it's encrypting a bunch of files. Cool. Right. Okay. We should probably press on just a little bit. And what we'll do now is we'll all take the red hats off and we'll put the blue hats on. So let's have a look at some of the tools that we have available to us when it comes to actually investigating these kind of cybersecurity incidents. So what we're doing up now is we're teeing up Sophos Central, and what we're going to do is investigate that particular set of attacks that we've seen there. So let's open up the Threat Analysis Center and let's have a look at the telemetry that we've got back from these endpoints around the outbreak. So let's go, because we just did the crypto one, let's have a little look at the attack chain associated with the cryptography that we saw there. Just bear with me for a second. So what you've got across the top of the screen there is you've got a complete attack chain there from start to finish, showing things like the root cause of the event, which has got the red dot on there. In this case, the root cause is Outlook. And then you've got the beacon event. So the beacon event is that thing that we detected as being malicious in nature that basically flagged this to our attention. And then across there, you can also see when it was detected, and most importantly of all, of course, what we did once we detected that. So in this case, the good news is that we've successfully cleaned that and removed traces of that from our estate. So if we open up the attack chain in a little bit more detail lower down there, you can see these are all of the processes and actors involved in what the attack that you saw there. So these are all the things that were touched and all the things that were interactive as part of this process. So any kind of decent threat hunt needs to take into account really two key factors. One is, where did the attack come from in the first place? And then secondly, what did it do and how did it interact with my environment before it was detected? So you can see there's a lot of information in there, potentially some of it quite complex. So what we're going to do is we are going to simplify the attack chain here by moving from this view down to what we call a direct path. So this is showing everything from the initial detection all the way through to the final detection here. So you can see on the left hand side there, that little red dot of Outlook, that is showing us the root cause. So we know that this is an email related attack, and in fact you can see the attachment that we sent to poor David. You can see the BA flight itinerary process, and then you can see the malicious content inside there. The embedded macro launching all of these other system level processes, including things like PowerShell, all the way through to OneDrive. Remember, we migrated into the OneDrive process. Then you can see all those things before we get to PowerShell, where you've actually got that encryption attempt happening. So it's showing us all of the information right across the attack chain, and it can show us some more really useful information as well. So if we go back to a more complete view that shows all of the processes, then what we're going to do here is we're going to test Lee's eyesight because we are looking for a couple of IP address connections from one of these called processes. There you go. He's got a good eye for it today. So what that should be showing you now is the IP address 11.11.10.201. So that was our cyber criminals machine. So you can see where the commands have come from and where those calls are coming backwards and forwards. So we could potentially use that a little bit later on. If we're going to go threat hunting for other things on the estate, then this is a good opportunity for us to use that knowledge of where that attack came from so that we can target our searches appropriately. So, okay. There is just one last opportunity for you guys to steer our direction, this time not in terms of the hack, but how we can use Sophos Central to look for other indicators of compromise. So not just things that we've seen that we've actually detected, but let's go embark on some hunts around for things that might be suspicious, might be unusual, indicators of compromise, precursors of things that might be going on our network. And there are three choices here. There's the option to look for unusual network connections. There's the opportunity to look for unusual PowerShell commands, and there's the opportunity to look for behaviors associated with an exploit that we already know about. So we can do all of these things with Sophos Central, but we'll give you the opportunity to select maybe one, maybe two if there's a bit of time. We'll see which way we go. Depends on what the audience wants to do next, really. So just a couple of you left to vote. Okay, perfect. All right, that's pretty much everybody voted. So let me share the results with you all. And you can see that the most popular request there is for unusual network connections. And that's pretty wise, to be honest with you, because a lot of these attacks will rely on external network connections, either to pivot across the LAN in the way that you saw us doing earlier on, or relying on the internet for things like command and control requests, relying on the internet to send out things like encryption keys if it happens to be a ransomware attack, for example. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip over to live discover, and we are going to look for those unusual network connections. And actually, fortunately, there is an inbuilt query inside inside live discover. So we're going to go to the network section, and we're going to look for processes with an open network connection. So this is going to list for us all of the processes on the machines that we've selected that are forming a network connection to somewhere. Okay, and what we're really looking for in this simulated hunt is the IP address of our cyber criminals machine. So we're going to hopefully find in here potentially a connection.
The threat was eliminated with the ransomware.
Of course it was. You're absolutely right. So that's not necessarily a problem, however, because remember we left putty there in a slightly compromised state. Well, I did say it was going to become useful later on. So let's open up putty on David's machine again, and this actually shows two nice little things. So I've opened putty there, or Lee's opened putty, I should say, and you'll notice on the right hand side there that Meterpreter has opened another session with that machine. So again, David doesn't know any different. He's open putty. He's busy doing putty stuff, but there's a little silent connection there established. Now, if we rerun that query, I'm hoping that we will now see that potentially suspicious connection being established. There you go. You see it down the bottom there. So what we learned from the other attack in terms of the IP address, then we can potentially utilize that in our searches so that we can detect that a little bit later on and hunt for other machines that might also be calling out to that same cyber criminal. So yeah, that was fortuitous that we code cave putty in advance. What we could also potentially do as well, should we have a little look at PowerShell, because we've talked about PowerShell quite a lot, and it was our second most popular request. So let's go to the search queries again, and let's go and have a look for unusual PowerShell commands. So again, fortunately, there's an inbuilt command search for this as well. So let's open up the PowerShell section, and let's look for processes that are suspected of using encrypted or encoded data. Now, this ought to be a massive red flag, because if anybody's sending encrypted data to PowerShell, or PowerShell's using that encoded set of commands, something's not right here. This is not a normal use of PowerShell. So this is immediately narrowing it down to things that we ought to be suspicious about, that we can look at in more detail. And it would be very easy to take that that encoded information and then reverse engineer it, look at it to see what those commands are and whether it's something that we really ought to be a little bit concerned about. Okay, so really useful little search string there. Now, tell you what, should we go the whole hog, and shall we have a look at behaviors from a known exploit as well? So we're just going to showcase one last feature within the EDR product from Sophos. So we're going to look for behaviors associated with an exploit that is already known about. So we're going to open up a search in here. And in this case, what we're doing is we are actually looking for the exploit that we carried out earlier on. So remember, we used Event Viewer, and we use that in conjunction with PowerShell. Then we can narrow down our searches to look for those things, and then run a query and see what we find. And we're also going to wind the clock back a little bit and look for historic data as well in here. So let's have a little peek at what we can find in here. There you go. So actually quite a few examples of that particular string of information there, where PowerShell has been used to call Event Viewer, which is in its own right potentially not normal and unusual. And we can change that search string down to be whatever we want it to be. So hafnium has hit the news recently for example, we could look at the attack chain and the processes associated with that and start looking for things on our network that match or mirror those kind of attacks. So we can look for whatever we really want to look at inside the Live Discover. And not only is it a reconnaissance tool, but if we find things in here that we don't like the look of, then we can also use a little tool called Live Response to actually start to remediate. So let's hop over to Live Response and let's go fix a problem on our machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up response for one of the machines inside our organization.
So just to reiterate, this is the outbound connection we are looking for on station A. We go to our devices.
And there we go. There's our machine, and we're going to go to Live Response. Now, what Live Response is doing is open, well, you'll see in a second, is open a command prompt on that machine, wherever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be inside the network. Obviously, we're living in an age now where people are working from home, working remotely, so we can still administer and help to carry out Live Response actions even on machines that are not locally attached to the network. So Lee's already done that. We've opened up that Live Response connection. Let's just verify who we are and where we are. So you can see we're at the system level access. Can we find out information like the host name for this machine, for example, just to make sure we're in the right place? Fantastic. Okay, so we're on our A machine that was part of that particular attack chain. So now we're here, what can we do with this command line? Well, we could, for example, decide to launch PowerShell. And we could look for the processes that are running on this particular machine, or we could look at, we can run the netstack command as an alternative. There you go. So these are all the network connections that are established on this machine. So is putty still in there? Yeah, it is. There it is. So you can see we've got some connections established there. Some of those obviously might be suspicious as a result of our code caved version of putty. So shall we use our connection to maybe kill that machine or that kill that process? So we got the PID. I didn't call it out, but Lee's obviously one step ahead of me. He's found it already. So let's use that process ID and let's stop that process. So we found something that's suspicious in nature and we're using Live Response to kill that on the fly.
Right, that should have gone. Trying 5,000. Oops. Let's take a look at doing this again. Gone.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've successfully killed that potentially compromised process, and it just buys us a bit of breathing room there while we carry out some further investigation, and we can look at that machine, find out why it's doing those activities that are suspicious. Right, so we're now just slightly over the hour, so that's pretty much as much time as we've got. So I hope you guys all enjoyed helping to influence and steer our hack venture. What we'll do now is we will wrap this session up. So don't look at my incredibly bad desktop. Awesome. Like I said, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our little adventure around this particular victim machine. I hope you first of all, you found it useful. I hope you learned a few things along the way. I know that Mark's got a few closing words before we invite some questions.
Yeah, perfect. No, thank you very much for running through that. Hopefully it was useful to everyone on the call and for you joining. So thank you for that. I suppose, yeah, any questions, any topics of discussion? I say that we've got a bit of time before we can crack open a few of the cocktails, and we're joined by the guys at Madam Geneva and Gent. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or come off mute and ask away while we've got some time.
It's got to be some. Blinded by science.
Good to see we have Intercept and anti-exploit on servers.
Yeah. So Intercept, I mean, I guess we haven't really demonstrated Intercept X to anywhere near its full level of potential, because we've kind of intentionally nobbled it by turning a lot of the detection features. Some of the things that you haven't really seen there is the machine learning aspect. So if a victim machine gets hit by a new version of malware that's never been seen before, has not been seen in the labs, then the artificial intelligence engine inside Intercept X is there to detect those things and hopefully close those down. The anti-exploit capability is an interesting one as well. So remember we used some of those exploit techniques that are documented. Then again, Intercept X is there to detect cyber criminals using those exploit techniques against machines. So again, even if that is packaged up as a different version of malware in a different way that we've not seen before, then it's there to cover those things. Now, one aspect of Intercept X that we did show off, but it's worth reiterating, is the anti-ransomware capability. So what that was doing was basically looking at the process that we'd hijacked. And remember, we ran the exploit command, or sorry, the encrypt command. What that was doing was basically scrambling up all the binary data of those files, just like a ransomware attack would. And Intercept X is there to detect that massive shift in the binary data of files. And as you saw, when it stepped through to maybe 2-3 files down, it knew that process was encrypting data, and that's when it stepped in and shut it down. So even though it had never seen this particular version of ransomware before, it knew that encryption was happening, it knew that encryption was bad, and therefore stopped it. And what it was also doing is, in the background, it was silently keeping a little private copy of all of those documents, so that when the cyber criminals nuke those documents by encrypting them, that we could dust it off, put it back into its original state. So you saw that aspect. You also saw some of the IPS capabilities of Intercept X as well. So IPS is something which is more typically associated to firewalls and scanning network traffic as it comes in and out of the environment. But Intercept X has got it on there as well. And what it was doing there was it detected my mind's gone blank now. It did. Remind me, Lee, what was, it was Eternal Blue, wasn't it? So it detected the Eternal Blue exploit, and IPS shut it down and isolated.
There is a way, yeah, of doing it. But yes, Eternal Blue, things like that, all CVEs usually found on the IPS module. So that's not under the hood.
Cool, perfect. And then I see there's a question around how would this compare to Cisco AMP? You've got technical guys on the call, so they could probably go in a bit, but happy to reach out and have a conversation on that, around sort of views, and try not to be too pragmatic about it, but it depends on what you're trying to achieve from your organization, your setup. I don't know if the guys from Sophos have any thoughts around that. I don't know what you guys see within sort of competitive information intelligence you guys have on Cisco AMP.
Okay, I have to confess I don't have a massive amount of experience with AMP. Lee, I don't know whether is that a rival product that you've really seen.
I don't have any info right now, but we can revert with that.
All right, let's come back to you on that one then.
Nick, we'll apologies if I've called you out, but you've put it to everyone, so hopefully you're okay with that. But Nick, we'll follow up on that one. Happy to talk through from our perspective. There will be a poll shortly around which will be released around feedback and some options as to sort of further conversations. One of those is actually myself and George run a sort of an endpoint market review. So we talk around all the sort of various different vendors within the industry, what the market's doing and how that's being taken. So that may be of interest, and we can pick that up then. Mm-hmm. Dan Parkinson, while on the victim's machine, Lee could have dumped all of the password hashes located on the victim's machine. Does Sophos have any protections against things like that?
Well,
so,
first of all, Dan's absolutely right. In fact, if you'd chosen the steal credentials option, then we would have demonstrated exactly that. Yeah, so harvesting stored passwords, taking the hashes out of that victim machine, and then using freely available tools like CrackStation to convert those hashes into plain text passwords is absolutely one of the things that we'd have done. We would also potentially have stolen some password credential information out of running memory as well as part of that that alternative route. And in both cases, then InterceptX has a feature in there called CredGuard, which effectively detects and mitigates attempts to extract data of that nature out of an endpoint machine. So again, that was another feature of InterceptX that we would have had to turn off in order to actually demonstrate that attack happening. But yeah, a very real possibility that that's the sort of thing a cyber criminal would do. Leah, then if you've got any comments around that you want to add?
That's exactly the same. It's a good observation. If we'd have had the time, we could have done actually both of them, dropped those credentials and actually laterally moved across the network using something like another attack, pass the hash or something like that. But obviously we've got an hour, so
yeah. We should do this again and pick a different audience and see whether they're going to have different routes.
For an afternoon.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's so many different iterations, and in fact, what you guys haven't seen, because it's very much behind the scenes, is when you start with those different question options, then potentially then the whole thing goes off in completely different directions. So there's various different outcomes that happen depending on starting out with which victim you select, all the way through to which types of attacks that you want to do. So yeah, there is loads of potential to see other techniques and other things happening.
We'll let you into a little secret. We ran it on Monday. Myself and George were the audience. It feels like I won the argument in terms of which way we took it. I think I'm the ethical hacker between us.
Some of your choices were pretty far from ethical.
But no, that's brilliant. There is a few you guys have already seen it now. The poll is live in terms of some feedback. In terms of the session, great to see you guys filling that out already. I say it, the last one is around what you want from the back of it. Is it more information around Sophos solutions around their EDR and MTR, some of the solutions that protect against these type of attacks. I say more broad review of the whole market. We can talk around the likes of Sophos and some of the competitors in the space. Or again, if you wanted to look at a trial, I know that some of you are Sophos customers already. If you don't have some of these features already, then you can look at enabling that within Sophos Central console if you're already on Sophos Central, or via the website. So yeah, if you can continue to complete the feedback, and myself or George will reach out afterwards to obviously cater and hopefully add some additional value off the back of this. Are there any more questions from anyone?